When Jesus started his church, there were no denominations. We were all one in Jesus. But after 2,000 years or so, Christianity hasn't always agreed on things. Personally, I'm a non-denominational Christian, since that's what I believe the church that Christ himself instituted was. So I thought to myself, why not judge all those denominations for fun? And what's the most fun way to judge people? We're going to be doing a tier list of all the different Christian denominations. Now, before we get started, let me start off by saying that I'm not actually going to be judging the actual people in the denominations. This is more of a list of which denominations I personally most align myself with, or which I would prefer to join. Obviously, with some being in higher tiers than others. That being said, I'm also going to warn you that the further down this list I get, the fewer good things I'm going to be able to say about the other denominations. If you are a brother in Christ, you are loved. And even if you're not, I wish nothing but the best for you in particular. Now, your denomination, on the other hand, just know that towards the end of this video, I'm going to be saying some things that are pretty out of pocket. Hopefully you're okay with that. Another thing I'm going to do is lump some denominations in together. Like, I'm going to be lumping all the Oriental Orthodox traditions into one denomination, all the Eastern Orthodox traditions into one denomination, and the same thing with the Reformed traditions. While they may all have their own individual differences, I think they're pretty much negligible, or at least I would be equally likely to join any particular denomination under the umbrella that I put them under. I'm also going to include my really bad Fortnite footage in the background. Sound good to you? Cool, let's get started. So we're going to be working with the following tiers. Essentially am, would consider, not a fan, and probably never. Starting off with the first tier, I would be most willing to join, and essentially already am, a Mennonite. Some of you may not know what that even is, and up until recently, I didn't even know what it was. But the best way to sum it up, in my opinion, is by saying that they're apolitical credo Baptists. A big part of their religion is a focus on God being our ultimate king. And rather than getting all worked up with politics, they mostly don't even bother voting. They also believe in credo baptism and memorialism, which aligns strongly with my own beliefs. And they're also pretty open to different interpretations on pretty much any doctrinal stance other than, things like sola scriptura and all the other beliefs you'd find in Protestantism. So the question then becomes, if I'm essentially already Mennonite, why do I not consider myself a Mennonite? Well, for two reasons. One, I genuinely believe that the church that Jesus himself instituted was non-denominational, and two, it gives me the freedom to disagree with them about literally anything that I want in the future. While I do feel pretty confident about my current beliefs, I'm always willing to be wrong, so I never want to feel pressured to hang on to anything that I currently believe. And that's the only denomination in my top tier. So let's move on to would consider. These are the denominations where I have some serious hangups, but I still respect them enough to consider joining a local church if I needed to. First up is going to be Methodists. Now, when I say that, I'm talking specifically about the ones where they're complementarians, and that's going to be in regards to any of the denominations moving forward. I like how the Methodist movement is all about being the real body of Christ. They acknowledge that we're all sinners in need of God's saving grace, and they're out there feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, and actually making a difference in the world. Obviously, they baptize babies, which is a little bit of a hang-up for me, but not a huge deal by any means. Another thing that I personally disagree with them on is the idea that faith and works are inseparable. But I'm going to disagree with that in a lot of denominations, so again, not a game changer. Now, on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, another church I would consider joining is the Assyrian Church of the East. Let me start by mentioning a few things that they don't believe, which are usually strawmanned into their theology. They don't believe that Christ's humanity and divinity were two separate persons. They believe that Jesus was fully human and fully divine in one person. They also don't believe that Jesus was born human and became divine later. They just don't believe that Mary gave Jesus his divinity. And I agree that Christotokos more accurately and completely describes Mary's role than Theotokos, which I personally am not a big fan of. Now, you might be asking why I'd choose to be part of an apostolic church rather than a Protestant church. And that's because in a lot of ways, most Protestant traditions are just Catholic light, and the Church of the East is a lot more Protestant than even some of the Protestant denominations. I also like how they're the least iconophilic of the apostolic traditions. At this point, we're going to start splitting hairs a little bit, but I think the Church of the East is at least the closest liturgically to how the early church functioned. Now we're getting into the not a fan tier, and at the top I have the Eastern Orthodox Church. Again, I'm choosing an apostolic tradition over a Protestant one, mainly because I genuinely agree with it more. Of course, I disagree that they are the one true church, and I especially disagree with their iconography. But at the very least, I like how they remain rooted in tradition that they helped create alongside the rest of Christendom. Particularly, I agree with them on theosis and the idea that we have been saved, we're being saved, and we will be saved. I also agree that the filioque isn't biblical. I agree that even if there's lots of different patriarchs who all carry major authority, there's still a committee of elders rather than one infallible person who represents God here on earth. Also, I'm putting the Oriental Orthodox Church right next to them because they're essentially the same thing. It's just that rather than believing that Jesus is fully God and fully man, they believe that Jesus is fully God-man. I kid you not, they schismed over that. Also, some of them believe in the Book of Enoch, so they're just going to be a little lower than the Eastern Orthodox Church for me. Next, we have Pentecostals. Obviously, I agree with them a lot more than I disagree with them. It's just that one thing we disagree on is so huge that it puts them all the way down here. They have similar views as me when it comes to the sacraments. They have the best music of all the denominations. They believe in sola scriptura and sola fide. But it's that darn speaking in tongues thing. Like, I can ignore it to an extent, but when it's like the defining characteristic of your religion, it's really off-putting. Just for the record, I do believe in the gift of tongues, but I don't believe in speaking some angelic language. I just believe that the gift of tongues today is having the gift of being able to learn and communicate in a language with relative ease. Not the exact same thing as we saw at Pentecost, but it's a spiritual gift nonetheless. Also, I'm pretty sure that all of Pentecostalism is egalitarian, and I just personally don't share that view. After them, I have Seventh-day Adventists. Since I'm going to have some gripes with them, let me just start off with the positives. I do believe that the Sabbath day is on Saturday, and I like how they use unleavened bread for communion, which is what my family personally does. I can at least get behind treating your body like a temple, and I really do respect their emphases on education and humanitarian work. But there's a lot of stuff that I really don't like. I think that they try to force something to have happened in 1844. I don't believe that Ellen G. White was a prophet, and I think they put too much emphasis on the end times. I also don't like how they view sin as evidence that you're not saved. You can correct me on that one if you want, but from my understanding, that's genuinely what they believe. It's kind of similar to Pentecostals, where I like a lot of the stuff they believe, but the negatives are just too big to ignore. Next are the Amish. They're similar to Mennonites, but they take it way too far. Like, my family is pretty simple with what we wear. My daughter wears a bonnet and dresses and all that. But the Amish are like, hey, you remember 1687? Those guys had the right idea. Plus, I'll be the first to admit it, I like technology. I like having YouTube and GPS and a refrigerator. Obviously, there's some variation to what kind of technology the Amish use, and that's why they're so high on my list, but I don't think I'd be very happy giving up everything else. Next are Lutherans, which are essentially Catholics with sola fide and no pope. I'm not a fan of pedobaptism and real presence, especially how they try to make real presence work as a mystery. Also, I may be misunderstanding this, but I believe that Lutherans claim that baptism is what gives us saving faith, rather than being baptized because we have saving faith. I really do respect what Martin Luther did. I believe in sola scriptura and sola fide, but I just don't believe that the Lutheran faith is for me. Now, anything that I said there, if it sounds offensive or off-putting or just plain wrong, correct me in the comments. This is just my own interpretation of what I understand of the Lutheran faith. And finally, in this tier, we have Anglicans, which literally are Catholics with sola fide and no pope. And even then, they still have the Archbishop of Canterbury. I really don't like how the church started. I most definitely don't have their same views on the sacraments. I don't like their liturgical style, and I disagree with them on pretty much everything other than the 5 solas. I don't mean to be negative here, and I genuinely mean no disrespect towards Anglicans or Episcopalians, but it just isn't the denomination for me. And now we begin the final tier, which are the denominations I would probably never consider. Starting off with the Catholic Church. You know, I've been seeing a lot of videos from people who were non-denominational like myself, and they said that they felt like they were missing something. And then when they stepped inside a Catholic cathedral for the first time, they felt completely at home. That is the stupidest reason to join a denomination that claims to be the one true church, as we will see with Mormons later. Now, I'm a fan of going to where you feel the most at home, but if you're going to a church that says that it's the same church that Jesus started, you might want to do a little bit of researching too. Just to be safe though, I took my family to a Catholic Mass to see if I was missing out on anything. Let me repeat that. I genuinely went to see if I was wrong in some way. And I left with a greater appreciation for my little non-denominational church in a strip mall. Personally, I don't believe in iconography, and I believe that their veneration of Mary treads a very thin line between respect and worship. I don't believe in papal infallibility or the supremacy of Rome, and for that matter, I don't even believe in a singular bishop of Rome in the 1st century. While their art and architecture and sculptures are all beautiful, their liturgical style also bores me to tears, and I have practically the polar opposite view as them on baptism and the Eucharist. Listen, I really do respect my Catholic brothers and sisters, and I can't wait to meet you all in heaven, if not here on earth. I just disagree with you on everything other than Jesus Christ himself. Now, everyone else on this list, I don't feel the need to respect as much, starting with our next entry, Mormons. I don't believe in the Book of Mormon. I don't believe that Joseph Smith or any subsequent leader of the church was a prophet. What makes me really not respect this church, however, are the fruits of their faith. The LDS Church genuinely believes that they are better people than you, and they will bring up metric after metric saying that they're healthier or better educated or basically anything else under the sun. And then they say that those metrics prove that God is on their side. You know what those metrics tell me? You have a whole lot of pride. And if the median person in your church had one less year of education or one more hospital bill, you just jump to another metric to prove your superiority. That said, I have them this high on this list because at least if I were part of their church, I would always have a dentist friend if I ever needed one. Just saying. Next are Jehovah's Witnesses, which I'm not going to say anything about because they're crazy. And following them are Baptists. And you might think, oh, you just have them this low because you're trying to be ironic in some way. Or you have them this low because you just met Baptists that you didn't like. No, I have them this low because I don't believe they truly understand who Jesus is. If you ever watch TV and see people with picket signs saying, "You're going to hell," there's a good chance that they're probably Baptist. If you see a pastor freaking out in church, getting angry, maybe even screaming profanities, there's a good chance that he's probably a Baptist. If you see someone spreading conspiracy theories about the Catholic Church, they're probably a Baptist. Basically, every meme you can think of that involves Facebook moms talking about Israel and the end times, shocker, is depicting Baptist theology. I won't say that they don't believe in Jesus, because they do, but they also arguably view other figures such as King James and Donald Trump more highly than they do the Savior. And I don't think I could ever, in good conscience, become part of a Baptist church. And finally, we have the Reformed traditions, such as Presbyterians and Calvinists. The reason I have them at the very bottom is because I'm not convinced they're actually Christians. And for this reason. Because they believe in predestination, it logically follows that God created sin and that the atonement wasn't necessary. That's going to be a knee-jerk for a lot of people, so just stay with me for a second. If God picks and chooses who he wants to be saved, then why did he extend the covenant of Israel to the Gentiles? Why would he even bother extending it past the seed of Abraham? I personally believe it's so that those outside of his covenant people could choose to come to him, but that's not an option in Calvinism. Predestination emphasizes that God is behind literally everything, from the very first sin to the cross to the second coming of Jesus. If literally everything that happens is because of God's sovereignty, then he was the one who caused Adam to fall in the Garden of Eden, not Satan. Yes, Satan might have been a tool for God to use, but God was the one who chose for Adam to sin. Adam was predestined to sin because of God's sovereignty. Also, if God has already preemptively selected who he wants, then the cross has no meaning anymore. If we're saved before we ever come to Christ, then Jesus never needed to die on our behalf. Calvinists believe that we cannot choose to love him on our own, and that to me is the biggest slap in the face to Jesus on the cross. 1 Timothy 2 verse 4. God desires that all of us will come to him, and if he only chose a select few to be saved, then that makes God a liar, or at least it makes Paul mistaken. I believe that in order to be a Christian, you need to believe in the efficacy of the atonement. And in Calvinism, the atonement not only wasn't necessary, but also doesn't work for all of humanity. I know that most people don't view Calvinism that low, but I just don't see how you can be a 5-point Calvinist while also believing that Jesus Christ died for the sins of the world. Okay, obviously we ended off on a downer, but what would you do differently? What would your tier list look like? Which denominations would you have higher or lower? God is real, and he loves you.